Hello, this is Sherry Avila, your hostess for Avila Book Talk, and we have as our guest today Conor Cunneen, who wrote the book Why the Irish Never Invaded America. And here's Conor.
Good afternoon, Sherry. Glad to be here and glad to be happy to be speaking about my book.
Now, Conor, that's a very strange title for a book. I had that book with me just this morning when I was at my training at the Loyola University Museum of Art, and they saw this title and they said, "Why Ireland Never Invaded America? What's that all about?"
Well, it is actually a strange title for a book, all right, but the book is, Sherry, is about it's a business book, but I've created a lot of humorous anecdotes in it to try and get the message across. And when people say to me, I thought the Irish already had invaded America, I say that, well, no, we didn't invade, we seduced America. But the title of the book, though, comes from an anecdote in the book where I talk about the reason why Ireland never invaded America is because Ireland couldn't feed all of the prisoners. And then I take that example and I say that that is an example of people, in a sense, fooling themselves. And when you're in business, you've got to be able to understand what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. So what I do in the book is I create some interesting anecdotes, throw some humor, and combine it with business strategy to get across messages on vision and on branding and business execution.
So you deliver these business concepts in a very unique way. I did actually read the book, and what I found, and having been in Ireland, I could appreciate it and I could relate to it.
Right, yeah.
That it not only, I think, promotes business, but it promotes business in a fun way.
Yeah.
My husband and I used to own a business, Avila Computer Services. It was a computer business. We had traffic counting mostly, but we also did geographic information systems, and we did databases related, mostly products related or services related to computers.
Yeah.
And my husband also owned an engineering business, so I understand a little bit about business, but to be honest with you, business was always a little bit on the dry side to me.
Yeah.
And so I did actually take classes. I took classes, I got a certificate in business. And so I sat through a lot of classes that dealt with a lot of these ideas that you have in your book.
Right.
And I thought to myself as I was reading this, I wish I'd have had a book that explained it in such a nice, common sense, plain, forward way, simple way, because it helps you to understand it.
Well, I think it does, and that's the essence, I think, of good communication as well. I mean, what I've done in the book is that I've created an Irish business guru whose name is Finbar Kozlowski, which isn't a particularly Irish name, as you can appreciate. And Kozlowski is based in Ireland. But what happens is that his American cousin, Jake Boyd, visits Ireland for 7 days for vacation. But Jake Boyd's business is in trouble, and he expects to spend his time on vacation. What actually happens is that he learns about vision, about branding, about strategy, using good business case studies given to him by Finbar Kozlowski, but also using a lot of humour and magical, mystical Irish imagery and some Irish roguish anecdotes as well, shall we say.
And I know one of your examples of that you use in the book is two airlines. We use an example of an airline that's been very successful. JetBlue, is it?
JetBlue, yeah. JetBlue is an airline that operates out of the East Coast here in America, mainly out of John F. Kennedy Airport. And JetBlue started up just over 5 years ago. Now, in the last couple of months, it's had some difficulties because of the price of aviation fuel, but that's happening everyone in the industry. But the logic behind JetBlue, the guy who founded JetBlue was David Neeleman. And David Neeleman said that he wanted to found an airline that would bring humanity back to the airways. So what he did was he said, when we're founding this airline, we will try and make customers feel as if they're important. We will give them services, and we'll also offer them low fares. And that's what they've actually been able to do. And they have been very, very successful. They've got very good customer loyalty. They've got very, very strong repeat business. And in terms of their profitability over the last 3 to 4 years, they've been one of the very few airlines that can claim to have been successful over the last few years.
And then there was another example you gave of Ryanair. Now, Ryanair, is that an airline that originates out of Ireland?
Yeah, Ryanair is an Irish airline, and it's actually now the largest airline in Europe. It carries more passengers in Europe than any other airline in Europe, more than British Airways, more than Aer Lingus, which it was originally. Aer Lingus was a much larger organisation than Ryanair. And what Ryanair does is it is a low-fare airline as well. And I talk a lot about vision in the book. And if you want to be successful, you need to have a clear vision as to what you want to achieve. And we mentioned there David Neeleman from JetBlue, who said that he wanted to bring humanity back to the airways. Ryanair, the guy who's the driving force behind Ryanair is Michael O'Leary. And I refer to him as Mighty Mick in the book. Michael O'Leary's driving ethos is that he wants to be the low-cost airline, and everything is done to make sure that Ryanair is the low-cost airline.
I actually did read a little bit about that. I remember reading, and did this carry through that he removed the pockets behind the seats?
Yeah, I mean, what he does is he tries to look at all of the costs and says, what costs are not adding to the customer, what costs are not necessary. And basically what they've now decided to do is that they've got rid of reclining seats.
Yes, I thought that was very interesting. But I thought it was particularly interesting because you made a point on which question they ask. And the question wasn't, do you want to get rid of reclining seats, as I recall.
That's
the
right.
question was, do you want the person in front of you reclining into your face?
Yeah. Well, that's true. You see, what he did was, it's about asking the right questions a lot of the time and understanding what your customers want. Now, he was... what you know when you're in these small airlines where you're kind of cramped in and someone brings
like
the seat back down in front of you and you kind of say, oh, I hate that. And yet you probably want to put your seat back, but you're only able to put it back 3 or 5 inches, and it doesn't really make that much difference. So what Ryanair realised was that if they got rid of reclining seats, it wouldn't really cause major problems. In fact, it might actually reduce a problem. But also what it does is it means that airline seats are not as likely to break or be damaged because they're not reclining so much. And similarly, what they're now doing with a lot of their new airplanes is that they're introducing leather seating, which is a little bit of a kind of an oxymoron if you're talking about a luxury or a low-cost airline. But actually what they find is that leather seating is easier to clean, easier to maintain. So while you might have a higher initial cost, it's actually, in terms of ongoing costs, it's cheaper. And that actually is what JetBlue did also. They introduced leather seating, which gives it a nice cachet and a kind of an upmarket feel. Yeah.
Well, that is so interesting because we have traveled on the planes before, and to hear that they're going to remove the pocket so that it makes it less costly is kind of interesting. And to hear that they're don't have or won't have the reclined. They don't have the reclined seats now in that.
Their upcoming planes are definitely getting rid of them.
Upcoming planes.
Yeah. I mean, they couldn't afford to refurbish all of their planes, but that basically is what is happening now.
Another favorite example that you had in your book was the one about Harley Davidson. I have a cousin that lives in Arizona, and she and her husband are just what you described in here, the weekend Harleys or the weekend rebels.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It's funny, you know, Harley Davidson is an incredible brand, there's no doubt about it. And I think what has happened is that over the years, the imagery and the kind of outlaw image of Harley Davidson has continued to grow, but in a safe way. And now what is happening is that Harley Davidson today, it sells its motorbikes at probably maybe $5,000 to $7,000 more expensive than the Hondas or the Kawasaki's, which are bikes which are probably just as good, and some people might say even better bikes, but you're not buying the brand image. And what you want is, when you've got a good level of disposable income and you want to show that you've got it made kind of thing, what's happening is that a lot of the middle income and upper income professionals are now taking up things like motorbike riding, and the bike you got to have, Sherry, is the Harley Davidson.
Yes.
And if you don't have it, you're kind of, go away from me.
Well, my cousin Betty, who lives in Arizona, and her husband, she told me in an email that they traveled all over the United States in their Harley. Harleys. Her husband has one, she has one.
Right,
And she said that they travel with doctors and lawyers and All variety of different people travel with them.
Well, it's amazing. I mean, even though Harley's got this kind of rebel or outlaw image, the average age of a Harley consumer right now, or Harley purchaser, is about 47 years of age. So what is happening is that people who are middle income, midlife crisis, my sister, I actually ride a Honda Shadow Aero, which is a motorbike like a Harley. It's a cruiser. So I don't actually have the Harley myself, mainly because when I was purchasing a bike a couple of years ago, I said I couldn't justify the price of it at the time. Now I understand that the image is everything, and I probably will end up buying a Harley. But my sister said to me that, Conor, you're going through a midlife crisis, as I was riding my motorbike, and I said, if this is what a crisis is all about, I can live with it, kind of thing. But it's interesting when you don't have a Harley Davidson, a lot of people kind of say, well, you go to the back of the room, kind of thing. But that's the power of the brand.
Yes, oh yes. I have a nephew who's single, bachelor, good-looking bachelor. And he has the top of the line Harley.
Yeah.
And he sent me an email with him and this gorgeous model.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, the top of the line Harley, I mean, people could be spending $30,000 on a machine that's got 2 tires and it goes from A to B, but it's the image. And you got to say that Harley have done a fantastic job in terms of developing that brand.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, what about Starbucks?
Yeah, Starbucks is actually another, you know, there are a few brands or a few names that really get people's attention, and where they're able to charge, in a sense, over the odds, but people are happy to do that. Harley Davidson is one, Starbucks is another example, and this goes back to the power of having a clear vision as well as to what you want to do with your business. Howard Schultz, who was the driving force behind Starbucks, when he came to Chicago in, I think it was 1987, to set up the first Starbucks unit in Chicago, he was walking down Michigan Avenue with a colleague of his before they'd ever opened one of the stores here in Chicago. And he said, in 5 years' time, everyone in this street will be walking around with a Starbucks cup in their hand. And when I read that, I thought, wow, that guy really knew what he wanted to achieve. And that was the clear idea and vision that he had, that success would be a lot of people walking around with the Starbucks cup in their hand. And then, having set that as a vision, he went out and he tried to make it happen by offering good quality product, lovely ambience, really nice ambience, a kind of an impression that it was a unique place to go to where you could meet friends, have a good camaraderie, and have a good social discussion, etc. And as a result, now Starbucks has about 10,000 units globally.
10,000?
Something like
globally?
that. Yeah, globally, yeah. And as we're finishing this interview, they'll probably have opened another one compared to when we started, because they actually open about 5 or 6 every day.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, at the moment. And they hope to, I think, increase their numbers this year by between 1,200 and 1,500 units.
That's amazing.
That's a lot of coffee. Yeah.
Well, now I know that all the young people love that for their hangout place, hanging place.
Yeah.
I know my daughter, my nephews, all my nieces and nephews, and my own children all go to Starbucks.
Yeah. Well, you see, what the Starbucks does is you don't go there for the taste of the coffee.
No.
You go there for the taste of the atmosphere, if I can put it that way. And Starbucks then are adding, slowly but surely, other services. For instance, as you're aware, they sell CDs there now, music.
Oh no, I didn't know that.
Yeah, they're one of the. They introduced the CD sales a couple of years back, and in the last year, they've sold over 700,000 copies of the Ray Charles CD, Genius Loves Company. And that would actually put it at the very top of the charts if it was going through any of the regular outlets. So they're now are actually able to add a service, they're able to add a profitable product for themselves, and also continue to build the image. And also now they're offering the ability to download some music in some of their stores as well.
And the ability to influence the popularity of a product.
Absolutely, yeah. Because they have adopted 1 or 2 recording acts and kind of promoted them as being the act that they will see going forward, will be big in the future. So they have a lot of clout now, definitely. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting because I remember just a few years ago when my nephew said, "Do you have a Starbucks?"
Yeah, yeah.
And we searched for a Starbucks for
yeah.
him.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I actually tell a joke in the book when Fimber Kozlowski and Jake Boyd are in a pub. And there's only one pub scene in the book now, I have to tell you, but it is a long pub scene, all right. But in the book, they're talking about the power of Starbucks and the way that you go into Starbucks and you're able to get a Starbucks with a twist of that, or you can get a tall or a grande, and with different kind of versions on it. And with the two characters in the book are talking about what would happen if they tried to do that with Guinness. If you had a Guinness with a double twist or with a shot of hazelnut or something, it wouldn't really work for a product like Guinness, but it does work for a product like
Yes.
Starbucks.
Yes, so it's got to be relevant.
It does, yes, yeah, absolutely.
It's got to be compatible.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, what about, you mentioned something about the rock star Bono, and by the way, did you know Bono was at the Irish American Heritage Center, and they actually have a seat with his name on it there in the auditorium.
Yeah. Well, that man gets around, he does. He's a wonderful character, he's a wonderful ambassador for music, for rock and roll, and for Ireland, because what he's done in terms of trying to help people in terms of the third world and reduction of the third world debt, he's comparable to the impact he's making on people's lives could be comparable to Mother Teresa, I honestly do think. But the comment I make in the book is that when we're talking about business, you need to be able to understand your market. And what I try to do in Why Ireland Never Invaded America is give people relevant anecdotes. And one of the anecdotes I talk about is that Bono does his market research. And you might say, oh, it's easy for Bono to do market research. I mean, that guy's worth millions, etc. That's true, but he does basic market research. And a couple of months back, when he visited the United States to speak to third-level colleges and to universities about the third world problem and the relief of third world debt and third world AIDS, before he spoke to the students, he read and he studied the United States Declaration of Independence. And he read and he studied the United States Constitution, because he felt that if he could understand these and understand the genesis of the United States as such, he could place some of these points back to the students and say there is almost a social demand on you to be able to help other countries and other people in need. And that was him trying to understand his marketplace before he actually tried to persuade his marketplace. And I think when he goes into another example, I don't reference this in the book, but I read it when I was reading a book on him recently. When he goes into a building or into an office or a corporation to get some information, the first question he always asks is, who's the Elvis in here? As if to know who's the person who really makes things happen. And that seems to be one of his great strengths, that not only is he good at selling, but he's also very good at doing the basic research that will help him do the selling. And the point I make in the book is that if you do basic research, whether you're a large corporation or whether you're a small one-person business, do that basic research. Ask your customers, find out about your customers. You have a much better chance of succeeding in business.
And you also made a point that even the large corporations that do have a big budget for research sometimes miss the target.
Yeah.
That they don't always analyze their research or research in the right places.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, just because you've got a large market research budget or consumer insight budget doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get it right. Coca-Cola, for instance, have admitted that they missed out on the bottled water craze initially. And you can see today with the problems that General Motors are having, that Ford is having, that even though they spend millions of dollars on market research, probably billions of dollars, it seems as if they can't get it right and give the customer exactly what they do want. So it's not only just asking the questions, but it's being able to analyze the questions as well. And I actually referenced in the book an example of Lyndon Johnson. I find Lyndon Johnson to be a really compelling character. He was an amazing individual. But when he came to when he came to Washington first.
That's actually one of my favorite examples in there. You have several, actually more than one example of Lyndon Johnson using his skills.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's one on vision, which maybe we mightn't go through
We're
here.
Skip that one.
And that one I won't say, but Lyndon Johnson obviously had a colourful vocabulary, and I used one example where he was quoted directly. But
so audience, go out and buy that book just so you can read that that chapter or that section in there about Lyndon Baines Johnson and how he inspires people.
That's right. It's the chapter is on vision, and it's titled "My Prize Bull," but it definitely is very, very illustrative. I think.
Yes, very illustrative.
Yeah. But when Johnson also came to the Washington in the early 1930s. As a congressional aide initially, the first night that he stayed in the hotel where all the other congressional aides were staying, according to his biographer Robert Dallek, he showered 4 times.
4 times?
Yeah, I mean, people kind of say he must have been pretty dirty or sweaty or something. But what actually happened was, according to his biographer, Johnson, this was a time when they only had communal showers, and they stayed in a hotel called the Dodge Hotel. And in these communal showers, what happened was Johnson got into the communal shower. There was a number of other congressional aides there, and he asked the congressional aides on his first day in Washington who the movers and shakers in Washington were, who got things done, and how do you get things done. So Johnson left the shower, toweled off, and went back up to his room. And about half an hour later, he comes back down again into the shower, and there's another group of congressional aides there. He asked them who the movers and shakers were, who gets things done, how do you get things done? And he did this a 3rd time, and he did it a 4th time. And the point I was making is that it didn't cost him anything in terms of monetary investment.
Yes.
Now, some people might say it might have cost him his reputation, but I mean... but I don't think he did that either, and it's probably an apocryphal story.
Well, maybe they'll think he's a compulsive obsessive.
That's probably what it is. Yeah. But you know, he was a compulsive obsessive in terms of trying to understand his marketplace. So if you can ask basic questions on a regular basis and analyse those, you have a much better chance of succeeding than if you don't ask the questions, or if you ask the questions and don't analyse them properly.
Right. Now, what about Willie Nelson? I think he was one of your examples in the book.
Yeah, Willie Nelson, I think he's actually a very good storyteller in his songs. But the example I quote in the book there, I talk about the importance of having a catchy brand name. You know, which can definitely help you when you're building your business. I mean, if I just take the title of my book, Why Ireland Never Invaded America,
yes.
It's a book on business strategy, and if I was to call it Business Strategy, 10 Lessons, no one's going to pick it up. So what I did was I tried to come up with some title that was relevant and was catchy, and Why Ireland Never Invaded America definitely is a catchy title. And it's also given me the opportunity not only to get people's attention, but also play to, I suppose, to an Irish community to a certain extent as well.
Although actually, in reading that, I think it's relevant to any community.
Absolutely, yeah. It is not just geared towards the Irish community at all, but it's opened the doors to me in that sense. But the story I tell about Willie Nelson is Toby Keith, who's a very, very well-known country singer as well. He met Willie Nelson in a restaurant on one occasion, and he said to Willie Nelson, "Willie, will you sing a song with me on my next record?" And Willie Nelson said, "I'll think about it. Send me the song. I'll look at it and I'll let you know." And Toby Keith said, "Okay." But as Toby Keith was leaving, Willie Nelson said, "What's the name of the song?" And Toby Keith's response was, "It's called Beer for My Horses, Whiskey for My Men."
Beer for my horses and whiskey for my men.
And Willie Nelson's immediate reaction was, "I'll record it with you." So he didn't even have to hear it, and that's the kind of the magic of a good brand name. Which isn't easy to generate now. I mean, most brand names are pretty banal, a little bit descriptive. But if you can create something that will get people to say, "Hey, what's that about?" you have a much better chance of the consumer at least picking up your product, looking at it, and then maybe sampling it. And you're halfway towards success then at that stage.
Yes, I agree. Now, one of the interesting points you brought out, but you know, I was reading your book and I couldn't. I must have skipped it over, or maybe it's at the very end, about the toilet marketing or the restroom marketing.
Yeah, yeah. I talk about a concept called restroom marketing, or if I was back in Ireland, we probably reference to it as toilet marketing. And there's a couple of examples that I referenced there. As you're probably aware, McDonald's, the hamburger group, were in pretty significant trouble a few years back. Actually, about 3 years ago, 3 years ago this January, McDonald's announced their first ever quarterly loss, about $340 million. And what was happening was that their image was falling off, their sales were falling off, and people just didn't feel that McDonald's was relevant. And they brought in a new chairman, a guy called Jim Cantalupo, who had worked with the organisation, but he was brought back as chairman. And the first thing he said when he came into the organisation was, wouldn't it be something if we had hot food and clean restrooms in our restaurant? I mean, this is the chairman of McDonald's saying this about his organisation. Wouldn't it be something if we had hot food and clean restrooms in our restaurant? And what he did was he said that there are some basics that we got to get right. And what I then took was I took that concept of clean restrooms and said there are certain non-negotiables that you've got to have in any business. And if you don't have them, customers will boycott you. So what I found interesting with McDonald's was that not only did Jim Cantalupo say that, but he and his successor, poor Cantalupo died about 16 months after he took over the position. His successor, a guy called Charlie Bell, an Australian guy, used to say, we will have the cleanest restrooms in the industry. And I found this intriguing, that even when they were talking to investors, when they were talking to the media, they'd be talking about their products, they'd be talking about their food, but they were also saying all of the time, we will have the cleanest restrooms in the industry. And they have, I think, to a great extent made that happen today. And it is one of those non-negotiables where they say, if we don't get it right, customers will not come back. And that's what I mean by restroom marketing, that organizations have certain non-negotiables that if they don't get right, customers will boycott the organisation, the product, or the service. And you've got to understand what those non-negotiables are.
Well, that's very interesting. Actually, you know what I thought you were going to say? I thought you were going to say the people in the restroom are listening. There's a spy in the restroom listening to what is being said.
No. Although I'll tell you another story. Now let me get this one right. I don't quote this in the book, but Harry Bennett, he was Henry Ford's enforcer during the 30s and 20s. And when Henry Ford was very, very anti-union. And this guy, Harry Bennett, was the main henchman that Henry Ford had. And he used to try and do his market research as well. And there is one anecdote told about Harry Bennett, what's his name, that he would go into restrooms during company functions, pretend to be completely drunk, lie out on the floor, and he would actually hear what people were saying about Henry Ford and the organisation. And that was his way of trying to get information. So maybe I hadn't actually thought about that example when you were speaking, but maybe I'll bring that into the next book.
Well, that's very interesting. Now, I understand that you were the winner of the year for the most humorous speaker of the year with Toastmasters.
Yes, I was indeed. I won the Chicago Toastmasters Humorous Speaker of the Year, and that was for a presentation on, of all things, customer service in San Quentin prison. And basically what I did was I looked at ways where customer service would be, when you're doing humorous competition, you've got to... Follow me up to Carlo.